The first time Caleb Monroe heard the phrase, "Nobody owes you a damn thing," he was 9. He had come home from school with a skinned knee and a paper that said Student of the Week on it, gold stars lining the border. His mother tossed the paper on the kitchen counter without looking. His father didn't even ask what had happened to his leg. "Life's full of skinned knees," Earl Monroe grunted, unscrewing the cap off a Miller Lite. "Nobody gives a damn. Get used to it." That was the culture of the Monroe household. Pride in suffering, silence as virtue, and a rigid refusal to offer comfort. The house itself was modest. 1 story, 3 bedrooms in a fading neighborhood on the edge of Topeka, Kansas. The paint was peeling on the front porch. The grass was dead half the year. The TV was always on, even when no one was watching. Caleb's mother, Darlene, was not unkind, just exhausted. She worked long shifts as a receptionist at the local hospital and never quite smiled unless the house was quiet and the bills were paid. Earl worked maintenance at the high school Caleb would later attend, mostly to make sure his son didn't start thinking he was better than the rest of them. Caleb was quiet, obedient. He wasn't the kind of boy who made noise or got into trouble. He read books, sci-fi, mostly, and asked polite questions. By middle school, he understood that emotions were liabilities and expectations were traps. His parents weren't cruel in the way stories usually describe cruelty. There were no beatings, no yelling, no bruises. Just rules. Hard, cold rules. Don't expect praise. Don't ask for help. Don't cry unless it's about something that bleeds. Earn your keep. Nobody owes you anything. By the time he was 14, Caleb had a weekend job bagging groceries at Landon's Market. His dad made him give up half his paycheck for house expenses, though they never discussed what that meant. He was also in charge of mowing the lawn, cleaning the gutters, and fixing whatever his father didn't want to deal with. Learning responsibility, Earl called it. Darlene just avoided the subject entirely. At school, Caleb kept his head down. He wasn't bullied. He didn't make space for that. People respected him the way they respected someone who might one day snap. He got good grades, stayed invisible, did what he had to, but he dreamed. At night, when the house was quiet and the television static finally cut out, he would lie in bed and stare at the water-stained ceiling tiles, imagining a world where things were different, where asking for help didn't make you weak, where a scraped knee meant a Band-Aid, not a lecture. The first spark of ambition came the day he met Mr. Halperin, the high school IT director. The man ran a tiny computer lab tucked behind the library, full of outdated machines and forgotten cables. Caleb wandered in one lunch period, drawn by the hum of fans and flickering monitors. Mr. Halperin looked up from a circuit board. "You lost?" "No," Caleb said. "Just curious. Curiosity's dangerous around here." Caleb smirked, the first real one in months. "So I've heard." From then on, Caleb spent his free time in that lab. He taught himself coding, basic stuff at first, but then Java, Python, Linux shell. Mr. Halperin noticed his talent, but didn't praise him. That was part of why Caleb liked him. The man let him learn without condescension. "You ever think about doing this for a living?" Halperin asked one day, not looking up from his keyboard. Caleb shrugged. "Doesn't seem realistic." "Why not? Costs money." That's when Halperin mentioned the scholarship programs for state universities. If Caleb kept his grades up, nailed the SAT, maybe even built a few things to show initiative, he might get in for free, maybe even with a stipend. Caleb didn't smile, but he went home that night and made a plan. At 17, while other kids were drinking in barns and chasing empty thrills, Caleb was building a weather app that could predict hail by scraping regional satellite data. He posted it online, and it got picked up by a local tech blogger. A professor from Kansas State emailed him, encouraged him to apply. It was the first time anyone outside of school had shown genuine interest in him. That night, Caleb sat across the dinner table from his parents. Earl was eating pork chops. Darlene was folding laundry on the couch. The television buzzed something about a murder in Wichita. "I got accepted," Caleb said. Neither of them looked up. "To Kansas State. Computer engineering. They're offering me a scholarship." "Good for you," Darlene murmured without inflection. Earl didn't speak until he finished chewing. Then he wiped his mouth with a paper napkin and said, "College? You really think we're going to help you with that?" Caleb blinked. "I wasn't asking for money. Just telling you." Earl snorted. "You better not be asking. You want an education? You pay for it. You're 18 in 3 months. Grown man. Time to start acting like one." Caleb's jaw tensed. You've had a roof over your head for 18 years. You want more than that. You earn it. That night, Caleb wrote down the words in his notebook. Same cheap spiral-bound kind he used for math class. He wrote in bold letters across the top of the page. Nobody owes you anything, especially not your parents. Underneath, in smaller print, this is not bitterness. This is fuel. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He took the blow the way he'd taken all the others, silently. He began making lists of the jobs he could take near campus, of what he'd need to survive, of what he would leave behind and never speak of again. He wouldn't beg. He wouldn't explain. He would endure. And one day, maybe, just maybe, he'd get to say the words back to them. Caleb Monroe left Topeka 2 months after turning 18. He packed his life into one black duffel and a tattered laptop bag. No one saw him off. His father was at work. His mother had forgotten about the bus time. He sat alone in the Greyhound terminal, knees tight together, backpack at his feet, trying not to feel anything. The trip to Manhattan, Kansas took 3 hours and 21 years off his back. Kansas State was bigger than anything he'd known. The campus had trees. People smiled at strangers. It unnerved him. The scholarship covered tuition, but not food, rent, or books. Caleb got a job within the week, overnight shift at a 24-hour print shop off Bluemont Avenue. The pay was trash. The customers were worse. But it kept the lights on. He rented a shoebox studio with mold in the corners and a radiator that coughed all winter. There were nights he couldn't afford dinner. Days he skipped classes to catch up on sleep. He worked through holidays, weekends, birthdays. No one called, and he didn't expect them to. Caleb learned to live on silence. He liked it better than obligation. In his second year, he caught the attention of a professor named Jordan Linker. Linker ran an applied software engineering lab and gave off the air of someone who used terms like agile methodology unironically. But he had a sharp eye and an instinct for talent. Caleb aced every lab, rewrote Linker's own code as a challenge, and once built a mobile game over a weekend just to see if he could. It went viral for a week on Reddit. Nothing huge, but enough to land him a few freelance gigs and pocket money. Why haven't you applied for any internships? Linker asked one morning, looking over Caleb's codebase for a freelance drone telemetry system. No time. You're wasting potential. Caleb shrugged. Potential doesn't pay rent. Linker narrowed his eyes. What's your plan after graduation? Get a job. Leave Kansas. Just like that. Caleb nodded. Just like that. He graduated at 22, 2 semesters early. GPA, 3.9. He had 3 job offers before finals. He picked a Seattle-based AI firm called Mechline. They paid well. Let him work remote. Gave him quiet. The next few years passed like a new kind of silence, one that didn't ache. He got better at what he did. Moved into a high-rise with dark floors and a view of the harbor. He filled his world with the things he chose. Books, machines, silence, order. Nothing and no one could touch him here. Then, one afternoon in late October, the phone rang. It was a Kansas number. Local. Caleb almost didn't answer. But he did. Caleb. The voice was thin, tired, still unmistakable. His mother. He sat in his chair, fingers frozen above the keyboard. It's Mom, she said again. I wasn't sure if this was still your number. He didn't say anything. We wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important. Still, he waited. She sighed. Your dad, he's not doing great. His heart. And we're behind on the mortgage. I lost my job last winter. They got tight. We could use some help. A pause. Then she added, You're doing well now, right? We saw some article about that app you built. Your name was on it. He still said nothing. Then a click. She'd passed the phone. His father's voice came through, low and rasping. You're making real money now, aren't you? Caleb clenched his jaw. It's time you did your part, Earl continued, like it was the most natural thing in the world. A son should help his parents. The line buzzed. Caleb almost laughed. Almost. But instead, he hung up. No words. No reply. Just dead air. He sat back and stared at the ceiling. Same way he had at 17. Only this time, the water stains were gone, and the ceiling was white, clean, expensive. He stood up, walked to the kitchen, made coffee. He didn't pace. He didn't curse. He didn't throw his phone. He just listened to the silence. 10 years. 10 goddamn years. Working through blood, bone, and burnout. All while they watched from afar, said nothing, offered nothing. And now they wanted something? He went to the closet, pulled down an old lockbox, opened it. Inside, the notebook, edges curled, pages yellowed. He flipped to the same line, the one he'd written the night he left for college. Nobody owes you anything, especially not your parents. He ran a thumb over the words, closed the book. Then he bought a one-way ticket to Topeka. The return to Topeka was like stepping into a half-forgotten fever dream, familiar enough to sting, distant enough to unsettle. Caleb's rental car rolled past cracked sidewalks and leaning telephone poles. The city hadn't changed. It had only sagged further under the weight of itself. Fast food joints had new signs. That was it. He didn't tell them he was coming. He parked 3 blocks away from the old house on Crestline Street, sat in the driver's seat for 5 full minutes, watching the porch light flicker like a dying pulse. The house looked smaller now. The lawn was mostly dirt. The screen door hung crooked, frame rusted at the hinge. He got out, walked slowly. Every footstep crunched dry leaves and memories. At the door, he knocked twice. Not hard, just enough. His mother answered. She looked older, worn, like paper kept in a wet drawer too long. Her mouth opened like she might smile, but it never reached her eyes. "Caleb," she breathed. He gave her nothing. Not a hug, not a word. She stepped aside. Inside, everything was the same. Same plaid couch, same stale air, same carpet that had absorbed a decade of disappointment and fried chicken grease. His father was in the recliner, thinner now, hollow around the eyes, skin gray beneath the yellow of nicotine stains. But still he held himself with that familiar arrogance, like gravity didn't apply to him. "Well," Earl said, "you look healthy." Caleb nodded once, sat in the armchair across from him. It creaked under his weight. Darlene hovered nearby. She offered coffee, awkwardly, like a peace treaty from a country that had already lost the war. Caleb declined. Silence settled, thick and awkward. Then Earl leaned forward. "We don't want to drag this out. We need help. Mortgage's 3 months behind. Meds cost more than we got. Your mom's unemployment ran out. I know we haven't been close. You know why?" Caleb interrupted, voice calm. Earl blinked. Caleb pulled something from his coat pocket. A notebook, spiral-bound. Familiar. He flipped it open, found the page, and handed it over. His father squinted at the handwriting. "Nobody owes you anything, especially not your parents." Earl Monroe. The room fell dead silent. Darlene's lips parted slightly. Earl's hand trembled, whether from age or anger. It was hard to tell. "I wrote it down," Caleb said. 10 years ago, the night I asked for help going to college." His father looked up, face pale. "That was different. You were a kid. You were a parent." Darlene stepped in, voice weak. "We thought we were teaching you to be strong. You taught me to be alone." No one spoke. Caleb stood. "I didn't come to argue. I came to remind you what you taught me." He walked to the front door, paused with one hand on the knob. "You told me to survive without you. I did." He left without another word. Back in the rental car, he didn't cry. He didn't rage. He didn't feel much of anything, and that frightened him more than anger would have. He drove across town, slept in a Marriott suite on the edge of downtown. High floors, clean sheets, climate control. The bed didn't creak when he lay down. At 3 a.m., he sat by the window, looking out over a city that had never cared whether he lived or died. He opened the notebook again, flipped past the quote, past the bitterness. There were other entries, ones he'd written during the worst nights. Mantras, goals, questions. One page caught his eye. "If you ever become the man you wanted to be, what will you do with him?" Age 21. Now, sitting in this quiet hotel room with a view of a place that never deserved him, he finally had an answer. He wouldn't be like them, but he also wouldn't save them just to be noble. There had to be a middle. The next morning, he went to a local bank. He wired a lump sum anonymously to his parents' mortgage account, then another to the pharmacy near their house. He left no name, no note, no contact, just numbers, just enough. Not for them, for himself, to prove he still belonged to himself. Caleb flew back to Seattle on a Wednesday. It was raining when he landed. He stepped into his apartment like a diver breaking the surface of still water, clean air, order, silence. His world, no grease in the carpet. No voices in the walls. He placed the notebook back in the lockbox and shoved it under his bed. A week passed. Then 2. He threw himself into code, client apps, machine learning models, back-end optimization. Clean problems with logical rules. Machines didn't lie. They didn't guilt or contradict. They responded exactly as expected. But something itched beneath the quiet. Not regret. He didn't regret walking out. Not even a little. The distance between him and Topeka had become a kind of armor. He could breathe again. But he did regret that it had ever been necessary. And that somehow, even now, after all these years, he was still playing by their rules. Still reacting to their philosophy. Still carrying their lessons like scars stitched beneath his ribs. One night, just past 1 a.m., his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Static. Then a voice. His mother. Caleb, she said softly. He didn't speak. We got the money. From the bank. And the pharmacy. They said it came from a third party. No name. He waited. We know it was you. Still silence. She cleared her throat. Your father? He doesn't say much anymore. Since the hospital visit, he's not really himself. Doesn't even argue. He sits most days. He said nothing. You didn't have to help. But you did. Caleb looked out the window, rain tapping the glass like memory. No, he said at last. I didn't. She waited, maybe expecting something more. But nothing came. I think I understand now, she said. What we did to you. Or didn't do. I didn't know how to stop him. I told myself it was strength. He wanted to ask her why she was only saying it now. Why not 10 years ago? Why not before the scars, before the long nights in a freezing apartment with nothing but a microwave and a mattress? But he didn't ask. Because he already knew the answer. People only look down when they're already falling. I'm not calling to ask for more, she said. I'm sorry. And for a moment, just a moment, Caleb almost wanted to believe her. Almost. But he remembered the cold silences. The passive stares. The years of standing by while Earl's gospel of earned suffering shaped a boy into a ghost. You didn't protect me, he said, voice steady. I know. You watched it happen. I did. I was your kid. I know. The silence that followed was deeper than any scream. And then she said something unexpected. You're not like him. He didn't answer. You may think you are. But if you were, you wouldn't have sent the money. Caleb pressed his lips together. You didn't do it for us. You did it to stay clean. He closed his eyes. She was right. And it scared him. After the call ended, he sat in the dark for a long time, the cityscape glowing faintly behind the glass. The room felt too neat, too silent, as if something had shifted in the foundation of who he was. He went to the bedroom, pulled out the notebook again. This time he didn't go to the quotes. He flipped to the back. Blank pages. And he began to write. Not lines of spite or mantras of survival, but something else. What kind of man he wanted to become next. Because vengeance had shaped him, but it couldn't sustain him. He had burned the bridge and walked away, but he was still standing at its edge, staring at the fire. And somewhere deep inside, he knew, if he didn't write a new story, his life would forever be a footnote in theirs. So he began, quietly, not with hope, but with clarity. He wouldn't forgive them, but he wouldn't carry them any further. The lesson was learned. Now it was time to unlearn. Seattle settled into winter like a shrug, gray skies, sleet against glass, the city always damp but never quite crying. Caleb Monroe adjusted. He always did. He layered his clothes, ran the heater low, woke early, coded until dark, and answered emails with surgical calm. No one at work knew much about him. He was a top performer, clean documentation, no drama. He said just enough in meetings to seem engaged. No more. He had spent a lifetime learning how to keep people out without ever slamming a door. But something inside had shifted since that phone call. His edges had softened, not to others, but to himself. For years, he had lived with an unspoken law. Productivity is redemption. Discipline is survival. Vulnerability is failure. Now he found himself breaking his own rules. He slept longer, took weekends off, walked the city aimlessly, coffee in hand, not to go anywhere, but just to exist somewhere that didn't expect him to justify his presence. He even began attending therapy, online, anonymized, once a week. The first few sessions, he barely spoke. But then the words came, slow and careful, like pulling splinters from old wounds. He told the therapist, Dr. Sharon Liu, about the notebook, about the lessons, about the silence he had inherited like a family heirloom. He didn't cry, but he did pause. Why do you keep the notebook? She asked. Because I still don't trust myself without it. To do what? To remember who I am and who I'm not. One afternoon, Caleb received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed his parents' house, fresh coat of paint, new door, patched roof. Taped to the back was a note in a woman's handwriting. "We used it right." That was all. He stared at the photo for a long time. Then he put it in a drawer he rarely opened. He didn't throw it away, but he didn't hang it either. Closure, he was beginning to understand, wasn't clean. It wasn't a door shutting. It was a door you learned to walk past without looking in. That spring, Caleb started mentoring a high school student through a nonprofit tech program. The kid, named Malik, reminded him of himself, quiet, sharp, hungry for something he couldn't yet name. They met once a week. Talk code, projects, career options. One evening, Malik asked, "What made you get into this?" Caleb hesitated. Then, "I wanted to build something no one could take from me." Malik nodded like he understood. Caleb didn't elaborate. He didn't tell the kid about the hunger, the silence, the years of trying to become bulletproof. But later that night, he wrote a new line in his notebook, first time in months. "Strength isn't what you build against people. It's what you build when no one's watching." He paused, then added, "And what you don't destroy when you have the power to." He hadn't spoken to his parents since that call. He didn't plan to. But sometimes, in quiet moments, he wondered what silence filled their house now. Not out of guilt, just curiosity. He knew they were still there, living in the shell of what had once been a battleground. He'd left them something that looked like kindness, but it wasn't. It was distance. A line drawn not in anger, but in self-preservation. He had survived them. Now he was learning to survive himself. Caleb Monroe turned 32 on a rainy Tuesday. He didn't celebrate. He woke, made coffee in his steel and marble kitchen, logged into work, and spent the day debugging a distributed messaging system for a logistics client he barely remembered agreeing to. By sunset, he was done. With the task. With the noise. He closed his laptop and stood at the wide apartment window, watching the clouds settle low over Puget Sound, the water smooth like glass, a mirror for skies that didn't know how to cry properly. His life was everything his father had once mocked: clean, quiet, independent. He had built it with no scaffolding, no applause. Every inch earned. Every step forward a rejection of where he came from. But he didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel like anything at all. Just present. He walked to the bookshelf, pulled the notebook down one last time. The cover was worn now, edges frayed, corners curled. A decade of movement. A decade of weight. He flipped to the first page. "Nobody owes you anything. Especially not your parents." Earl Monroe. He turned to the second page. "This is not bitterness. This is fuel." Then to the middle. "Productivity is survival. Don't bleed where they can see. Control is safer than connection." And finally, to the end. Blank. He stood there for a moment, pen in hand. Then he wrote, "Some lessons are taught to hurt. Others are kept to heal. The trick is knowing which to outgrow." He closed the notebook, placed it gently in the trash. Not out of hate, out of readiness. That night, Caleb took a walk through his neighborhood, past the late-night ramen place, past the bookstore with the crooked, closed sign, past a mural of a boy building a kite out of torn paper. The world didn't care who he was. And for the first time, he realized he didn't need it to. At home, he checked his inbox. There was a message from Malik. "Finished the project. Got the internship. Thanks, man. Couldn't have done it without you." Caleb stared at the screen. He typed, "You did it on your own. I just made sure you didn't quit." He hit send, then closed his laptop and stood in the quiet. Seattle hummed around him, unbothered. There were no great victories here. No cinematic resolutions. Just a man who had once been a boy who had been told love was earned, pain was strength, and nobody owed you a damn thing. Now, at 32, the man knew the truth. Some debts were never real. Some payments were never owed. And some lessons were best left behind. Not forgotten, but buried, deep enough that they stopped echoing.